Mino Lion Media presents Business First.
Hi all, and welcome to a new edition of Business First with Sonia. I am your host, and today we are talking with Daniel Betancourt, who is the president and CEO of Community First Fund. Welcome, Daniel. How are you?
Doing well. Nice to meet you and see you, Sonia.
Do you prefer Dan, Daniel, Mr. Betancourt?
Well, when I get in trouble, my mother used to use Daniel. So Dan's, and my high school friends are Danny. So if you're feeling in the mood, you can call me whichever one you want.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us because I know you're a really busy gentleman.
Yeah.
You're working with an amazing organization called Community First Fund. And I would encourage our listeners to go on and look at your background, look at the organization, but to also listen to the success stories. But before we get into the crux of what you do, want to get a little bit about your background. You've been with this organization for almost 25 years. You have a strong financial background. What were you doing before you were introduced to this organization?
Well, Community First Fund is a community lending organization, been around 30 years. And so I was a banker, commercial lender, right out of college, right out of business school. And, a couple of years into my career, I was vice president and came over, 20 some years ago and haven't looked back.
What about the organization that really encouraged you to stay as long as you have?
Well, the primary mission of Community First Fund is to provide loans, access to capital, and business counseling to entrepreneurs of color, and specifically, Latinos and African Americans. We know for too many reasons don't really get a fair shake when they go to the banks and financial markets. And our organization was founded by African American Latino leaders to go out and raise capital to do something like a novel idea that maybe we should lend to people in our community. And we've gotten paid back at higher rates than what banks get paid back because, we can get into it. But when you treat people with dignity and respect, you get that in return.
What's fascinating about what you do is you do way more than just lend money to small businesses. You truly are a community development organization. Your 5 pillars are economic security, affordable housing, food resources, accessible healthcare, as well as educational opportunities. Is that what you've grown? Is that how you grew under your leadership? Are those all of the areas that you have expanded into?
Yeah, that's a view on the type of lending that we do. A lot of community lending organizations like ours were community revolving loan funds, as they were known, and today they're known as community development financial institutions, or CDFIs. It's a fancy term for these revolving loan funds that were created back 20, 30 years ago. But what you described there, the job insecurities are entrepreneurial lending. And then when you start talking about fresh food, that's us working with entrepreneurs of color who want to start grocery stores and supermarkets in their region. So we're working to solve that fresh food insecurity, or neighborhoods that just can't get fresh food. And then the other things that so what we ended up figuring out is don't lend just to lend. Sure, we're solving for helping communities of color, but what are the challenges that community have? So one is obviously job insecurity, and that's where the entrepreneurial piece comes in. Another one is obviously we know we want our communities to have fresh food, so that's where our fresh food financing come in. But then other things like educational focus, like we should be lending to daycare centers and charter school, and also like not everyone has a medical home, so shouldn't we be lending to federally qualified health centers and doctors and things like that? And then finally affordable housing. We should make sure everyone has a clean, safe, lead-free home. So lo and behold, we should be working on developers of color. So it's just too easy, Sonia, to say we're going to go lend to entrepreneurs and then ignore all the other needs that communities have. And so that's why Robert Wood Johnson calls it the social determinants of health. And you just said it right there. Health. Have a healthy home, a health home, have a place to live in that's dry and clean. The pieces on educational attainment, right? And there's intersections. If you don't provide someone a job, it's going to affect your health. If you don't help people finance education, they're not going to be able to get that job. And just so these pillars, really interact with each other. So I'm not going to sit here and say that, just providing loans is going to solve all that. But if we're going to provide loans, we should be doing it in those areas that are going to make our community stronger.
And did you understand that before you got to this organization? Or is it
No,
something that you learned?
The community taught me that. I went to school in the community. And so what I knew as a banker was we provided loans and products. I thought more like from a product orientation. Oh, you come and you get a small business loan, or it's a large business loan. And what I realized in community, when you're in community, the community tells you what the needs are. And so I started thinking less product oriented and more like, no, we got to solve community problems and use access to capital, not just for entrepreneurs, but to these housing CDCs that want to build housing, and to these other assets that I just described that want to try to turn the community around. So another way was thinking about it is there are other partners that are working on these challenges or these opportunities, and if they have access to capital, we got to think beyond entrepreneurship, but think about all the other areas that we just talked about to affect our communities and make them and help them thrive in ways. Because honestly, think about it. An entrepreneur on the first floor. And then, we have other pillars and, other centers in the community trying to help that community thrive.
Right. It's an excellent example for what this should look like across the country. Are you having these conversations with donors?
Yes.
So folks?
We are one of the largest community lending institutions in the country. And we do have investors. So the way that we're structured, just, how bank has depositors, where do we get our capital? We got investors, kind of looks like a CD where you can go invest in money for 5 years and you get a return. So we, like a bank, has to have depositors. Ours are just 5 or 10 year investors, and we get them from the Sisters of Charity, their pension funds in Houston, or the Sisters of Mercy in California, and banks all across the nation are like, well, we know we're not reaching this community, so we better at least invest in this community lending institution. Foundations investor endowment, churches investor parts of their endowment funds, and even private individuals invest in community first funds. So all that to say that we already are recognized nationally. We're getting investments all across the country. And I think this model went from proof of concept, like, could you lend to poor people, marginalized people, oppressed people, and get paid back at higher rates? And no one knew that, if that was going to work. But the nuns were the first ones, right? And we knew that we had to pay them back. Otherwise, where we're going, right? I use that word, we're going south. And so we made sure that all of our investors were paid back because our clients paid us back because they appreciated how we treated them.
Wow. And that's what's powerful when you watch your website is set up beautifully where you can see many of the success stories. And so when you're listening to people speak in really basic language about their challenges, hear from people where English is definitely a second language. As I was telling you earlier, it evokes a lot of feelings of emotion because you really do see the dream, the American dream, happening for people who would normally just be marginalized or just hoping that this could happen. What are some of either the people or the stories that have really moved you on this journey?
I think, one story, is, and I call them Afro-Latinos, in the Latino community, the Black Latinos. And when you have Leopoldo Sanchez, who came to us for, what was then a bodega, and then he came to us for, a neighborhood grocery store with $350,000 loan. And now, he's putting a supermarket in, he needs a $6 million loan, of which we can do only half of that, $3 million. And we found an organization in New York to do the other 3. And so, but I will tell you, the majority of the loans that we do are to, this gentleman, Mr. Keon, he just transports people who are disabled from the hospital to their home, and he needed his first car, a minivan. Remember the word minivan? Back, 10, 15 years ago, and he's on, I guess it's a van now, van number 20, and he has like employees driving, Keon Transportation, and he's in, Harrisburg, PA, because we lend from Harrisburg to Philly and up to, Allentown, Bethlehem, and Easton. And so those are the stories that drive me. You saw those stories there on our website, but they're real people. And Sonia, a lot of times people thank me or thank us. Hey, thank you for doing this. And I want to say thank you for being a serious business owner. And we're just unleashing what you've already done, honestly. And so my job is to raise capital, but their job is just to do a good job for their family and their community, and yes, pay us back so we can help other people along the way. We do have fun along the way as well.
And I'm glad you mentioned, yes, that they are people, because I think when we have these conversations around community and lending and borrowing, we just think of it as these equations of money going into communities, and we don't really see communities as people. But and I think that's what's so powerful about hearing these stories. When you see somebody, say, yeah, I want to open up a barber school, I want to open up a childcare center, this is the mechanic shop, that the services that you kind of take for granted in your neighborhood, right? That you are supporting those things. I'm sure your team. What's the dynamic of your team like in terms of making these dreams come true?
Well, we do have we got about $250 million in capital. That sounds like a lot of money, and it is. When I walked in here, we had 300,000 in the little revolving loan fund. We can only do loans like 5 or 10 million, 5 or 10,000. Whoa, that was all. $5 or $10,000 loans when we were 300,000. And I knew that we had to grow the organization, because here's one thing I didn't want to happen: that entrepreneurs would run out of wouldn't have enough capital. We were undercapitalized them. And so today we have a staff of about 70 covering that eastern southeast PA with 6 offices. And we're obviously one of our largest offices are right here in North Philadelphia, covering the city. We're here in basically Old Kensington, if you think of Girard and Second. And it's just what about our staff? Most of them are represent the community, African American, Latino lenders. And they just get it. They just get how to talk to our community. They're bicultural, bilingual. They know how to lend to immigrant populations that, don't want to show their income. And then, it's like, we got to show that income to provide that loan. And just having those, what we call business counseling, bringing people along into the capital markets and just getting them to keep growing their business, and just throwing a whole heck of a lot of capital at them, because, like I said earlier, they deserve it. They know what they're doing. And all we're doing is getting out of the way and just not putting up those barriers that they're used to getting.
Your stronghold is in Pennsylvania. You're also in New Jersey and Delaware.
Yep.
Is there interest to grow? I would imagine that there's interest to grow into other areas as well.
Well, one of the things we're doing, so most of what we've been talking about is business lending. And, remember I told you one of the other things we want to focus on is housing. And we work with developers of housing, but never consumer lending. And so we just got our charter for a credit union. Unbelievable. We've been thinking about this and just got it in July. And we just opened up our first branch on the day after Martin Luther King Day. That's pretty fitting, spiritual for me. In Lancaster, Pennsylvania, we opened up our first, and I say first branch. Our second branch, I want to open up in the next 2 to 3 years, working on the capital campaign right here in the Old Kensington area. We are, and we're just going from there. And then we're looking at Harrisburg and these other towns of Reading. And what we're going to do is try to use technology, through our mobile app. Just went live. You can download on from Apple, the Apple Store. Because what I learned in COVID was something interesting, right? I learned that poor folk can use their phones. They applied for grants, and we got them money. They signed on their phone, and we did DocuSign, we did all that stuff. We did things with our clients in our community. What I didn't tell you, and my partner Devin, Alan's your partner, one of our political consultants. We went to the state of Pennsylvania and asked the governor and Senator Hughes and the other senators and reps helped us get $200 million because our black and brown businesses did not get PPP dollars. And so we distributed $200 million in average of $10,000 and $20,000 grants across the entire state. And $40 million of that $200 million went right here in Philadelphia. And then we did something else. We went to city council and said, hey, we got $200 million in requests from Philadelphia. Can you give us another $40 million? Because we want to make sure we get at least half of those applicants. And so they gave us another $40 million. And then the senator just recently, we said, look, the hair salons who were closed by the Department of Health, can you give us another $20 million? And we just got that from Senator Hughes and others and the governor. And so we've been busy getting grants to businesses that have been devastated by COVID. So we've been up to other things other than this credit union idea I told you about, our normal lending. And what happened was we came together as a community. There's these other community lending organizations. particularly Black-led CDFIs here in Philadelphia, Enterprise and others, Vested in, Beach, there's a number. And of course, United Bank, Miss Smalls, and United Bank was one of our partners. And so the whole idea was to get this federal money to make sure that our businesses got grants at a time they really didn't need loans. They needed to be supported. And I think we were in alignment with the state legislature around that. And again, if it wasn't for Devin Allen and people like Senator Hughes and all his Senate and House colleagues here in Philadelphia, it wouldn't have happened.
Well, you are to be commended on that because, as you know, in a lot of the coverage around these loans, Black and brown businesses suffered tremendously, and it wasn't for the lack of wanting to get a loan. It was a lot of them just didn't know how. They just didn't know, or they may not have had the paperwork in place. And did you run into a lot of that as well? That there were businesses that just didn't have the paperwork together? Did that mess them up in terms of being able to get these loans, or were you able to help folks in those conditions
so
as well?
I'll tell you that if you recall the PPP program through the SBA ran through the banks, and you had to have a relationship with the bank. A lot of banks said if you're not a customer, we're not going to give you that forgivable grant. We thought that was de facto discrimination. I said that to banks. I mean, I just speak truth to power. And it's not to say that banks didn't help a lot of people, because they did. But I would say nationally, only 15% of entrepreneurs of color got PPP money. And so we said to the legislature, we're going to make sure, and they agreed, that half of that $200 million state version of a PPP program will go to entrepreneurs of color. And it turns out that when you want to go half across the state, 70% of that money, that $80 million I told you in Philly, the city council, $40 million from the state, 70% of that money went to entrepreneurs of color here in Philadelphia. So we made sure that number was way north of 15. And to your question, how do we do that? Because we didn't have to underwrite people. We just had to say, if you filed your tax return, you showed income, we know you had a loss, we gave you the money. This wasn't about credit score. This wasn't about credit underwriting. This was upload your tax return. Behind the scenes, we did a little bit of due diligence and wire you the money. Sign it on your computer, sign it on your phone, and get it out. So in other words, meet people where they're at, believe in them, get the money out. That's the business that we're in. And I have to say that, Congressman Evans, Dwight Evans, is a champion. He made sure that, we took advantage of these federal programs and called the governor and made sure this happened, along with, as I said, Senator Hughes, among many other unsung heroes. I mean, all the state reps and all the senators in Philadelphia made sure that the CDFIs got that capital to get it out to Black and brown business in Philadelphia. Can't say that enough. Wow. A lot of times our elected officials don't get credit. I say this to them directly. But every once in a while, we should appreciate the work that they do on our behalf.
You mentioned that you have a lot of diverse investors. Yes. For those who aren't, what have you been able to either share with them, impart to them? What have they learned about this experience?
I think the investors learned that, they should put capital in the communities that they want to affect. It's great to invest in, the stock market, and, we should all have, invest our 401ks and all that. That's all great. But a part of our money, foundation money or bank money, should be invested in institutions that represent the very communities that they want to help. And, like I said, we're a pretty large CDFI. We have, our payback rates during COVID were higher, were negative. Like, in other words, we provide so much cash on the balance sheets of our clients, they paid us back at higher levels than they did before COVID. We had a negative charge-off. So what does that tell you? Treat people with dignity and respect, and they just return it back. And to me, that's spiritual, and it's biblical. And so, I am a son of a preacher, so I got to preach here and say, always do the right thing, and it comes back to you in many, many ways. And we know that as a people.
What's next for you all? I mean, you talked about the credit union.
Establishing
the first one.
Right.
So
Philadelphia's next, because, every nonprofit will tell you that their best kept secret. None of us are happy or proud of that. And so I don't think Philadelphians know about Community First Fund. I don't think they know that that we merged with Finanta, a local CDFI that served predominantly the Latino community in North Philadelphia. I don't think they know that we merged and that we have this capital available. And I just think that people just think they don't deserve to be treated right, or they don't think they're going to be treated right. And they should be knocking on our doors and saying, we want to borrow capital because we want to do this in our community. And the nonprofits don't know that we lend to housing CDCs, and you already know that I mentioned those other areas that we lend to, in terms of health centers and things like that, supermarkets, etc.
Well, we hope to get the word out for you and encourage people to. The other thing I wanted to ask you is there an opportunity for young people in the community to also get a sense of what this can look like in terms of jobs or understanding, or are there programs that you support for young people as well?
Well, in terms of jobs, you can look up the CDFIs here in Philadelphia. I think maybe Devin Allen, who I mentioned, who's in the background here, can maybe provide those websites that we can attach to this podcast. So, coming out of business school, coming out of 4-year school, we can't hire enough good local people. We're willing to train, but as far as in the general public, people can invest in organizations like ours. We do have a prospectus. We do file with the Department of Banking, which means that people can invest. The minimum investment is $1,000. And so, it's like we have champions in the community investing in our fund. They get that return. But more importantly, they can talk us up and learn about what we do. They're almost like an owner, because we invite them to our annual event. We give them an annual report. And it's not a true ownership. You're investing like a CD, but now you're tapped into a whole new energy of helping Black and brown businesses in Philadelphia. So
for those who want to get in contact with you and want to know a little bit more, how can they find you?
So it's communityfirstfund.org, and you go in there, look at the investor page, and you can make a donation. I'm actually saying make an investment where you're going to make a return. You can make a donation, but I also want people to say you can make money on investing in your community, and it starts at $1,000. And we could even work with folks to say, hey, I don't have 1,000, but I 10 months, I'm going to put $100 a month in there, and then I'll have 1,000. That's going to be my investment, and I'm going to keep it in there to help my community for many years to come. And then just telling. More importantly, honestly, most of our clients that we learn from are just word of mouth. Like, hey, someone starts talking about a business, I couldn't get a loan, and did you hear of Community First Fund? Did you hear of Enterprise? Did you hear of WRC? Have you heard of PIDC? I mean, all these partners around. Impact Services, and it just there's like 12 organizations, including United Bank here in Philadelphia, that have capital and are eager to get it out.
Well, thank you for sharing your story, for sharing the work that you do. Congratulations on everything. We are going to continue to support. We're going to encourage our listeners to follow your progress, and we wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. It's a pleasure meeting you and being on this program. Thank you.
And thank you all for listening. We'll be back again next week with another great guest. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.
The Business First Podcast is hosted and produced by Sonia Aline. Associate producer, Ariel Mancibo. Executive producer, Ken Johnson. Find the Business First Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. And on social at business_first_podcast on IG. The Business First Podcast is a Mean Old Line Media production.